In 2019, a phone company from Cupertino, California, shipped 30.7 million watches in a single year. That same year, the entire Swiss watch industry, every brand combined, Rolex, Omega, Patek Philippe, Tag Heuer, Breguet, all of them together, shipped 21.1 million. A tech company that had never built a watch before 2015 was now outselling 400 years of Swiss craftsmanship by nearly 10 million units. And the part that makes this story really sting is that the man who ran Tag Heuer saw it coming and laughed it off. In 2015, when Apple launched its first watch, Tag Heuer CEO Jean-Claude Biver told reporters that the Swiss industry was not afraid of Apple because its watch could never be repaired in 1,000 years, could never be inherited by children, and would never become a status symbol. He was right about all three of those things, but none of them ended up mattering. To understand how a company known for phones and laptops managed to beat an industry that had been perfecting its craft since the 1500s, you have to start at the beginning. And the beginning is stranger than you would expect. Because Swiss watchmaking did not start with some visionary inventor deciding to build a better clock. It started with a ban on jewelry. In 1541, a man named Jean Calvin was running the city of Geneva, Switzerland. Calvin was a Protestant reformer with very specific ideas about how people should live, and one of those ideas was that wearing jewelry was sinful, too flashy, too vain, too much concern for earthly appearances. So he banned it. Every ring, every necklace, every bracelet, every decorative brooch, all of it forbidden overnight. Now, Geneva at the time had one of the most skilled communities of goldsmiths and jewelers anywhere in Europe. These were artisans who had spent their entire lives learning to work with precious metals, who could engrave patterns smaller than a grain of rice, who could set gemstones with a level of precision that took decades to master. And in one decree, their entire livelihood became illegal. They needed to find something new to do with their hands. Something that Calvin could not call vanity. Something useful. And the answer turned out to be sitting right in front of them. Watches. A timepiece was a tool, not an ornament. It measured the hours for prayer and discipline. It served God instead of ego, Calvin approved. But that was only half the equation. Around the same time, France was tearing itself apart in a series of religious wars. French Protestants, called Huguenots, were being persecuted, imprisoned, and killed in large numbers. The St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572 saw thousands of Huguenots murdered in Paris alone, and the violence triggered waves of refugees fleeing across the border into neutral Switzerland. Many of those refugees were already experienced clockmakers and watchmakers. They landed in Geneva, a city that welcomed them because of Calvin's Reformation, and they found a community of former jewelers who had the artistry and the metalworking skill but were still learning the watchmaking trade. The combination was extraordinary. The Huguenots brought the technical knowledge of mechanical movements. The Genevan goldsmiths brought the craftsmanship and the eye for beauty. Together, over the next several decades, they turned Geneva into the watchmaking capital of Europe. By the early 1600s, the city had formal watchmaking guilds with strict quality standards. Knowledge passed from master to apprentice through years of hands-on training. When Geneva eventually had more watchmakers than it could support, the craftsmen spread into the Jura Mountains north of the city. Towns like La Chaux-de-Fonds and Le Locle became entire economies built around watch production. Farmers in the mountain villages would make watch components during the long winters when they could not work the land, then send them down to the workshops in the valleys for assembly. The entire region organized itself around this single craft. Switzerland did not just make watches, it became watches. The identity of the country fused with the product in a way that had no parallel anywhere else in the world. For the next 300 years, Swiss watches were the unchallenged global standard. Names like Abraham Louis Breguet, who invented the tourbillon in 1801. Names like Patek Philippe, founded in 1839 in Geneva. Vacheron Constantin, which has been making watches continuously since 1755. Omega, Longines. These brands built reputations that carried the weight of centuries. A Swiss watch was not just a product. It was a guarantee of precision, heritage, and permanence. When you bought a Patek Philippe, the company's own advertising told you that you never actually owned it. You merely looked after it for the next generation. And then, on Christmas Day of 1969, a department store in Tokyo put a gold wristwatch on its shelf, made by a Japanese company called Seiko. It was called the Astron. It was the world's first commercially available quartz wristwatch. It cost about as much as a small car, and almost nobody outside Japan noticed. Here is the part that makes the quartz story so painful for the Swiss. They helped invent the technology. In the early 1960s, a consortium of about 20 top Swiss watch manufacturers, including Patek Philippe, Omega, and Piaget, formed an organization called the Centre Electronique Horloge in the city of Neuchâtel, specifically to develop a Swiss quartz wristwatch. They succeeded. They built the Beta 21 quartz movement. Omega used it, Rolex used it, Patek Philippe used it. But the Swiss treated quartz as a curiosity for the high-end, not as a mass-market strategy. They built a few expensive quartz models, priced them like luxury goods, and went right back to doing what they had always done, making beautiful mechanical watches by hand. Seiko took a completely different approach. Instead of treating quartz as a premium product, they figured out how to mass-produce it. They invested heavily in automation. They vertically integrated their manufacturing, so they controlled every single component, from crystal oscillator to watch case. And they started driving the price down, fast. By 1973, Seiko had reduced quartz watch prices enough to hit the middle market. By 1977, Casio had pushed digital quartz watches below $50. Japan was not trying to compete on prestige or tradition. Japan was competing on accuracy and price. And on both counts, it was winning by a mile. A cheap quartz watch was accurate to within a few seconds per month. The best Swiss mechanical chronometers were accurate to within a few seconds per day. The math was brutal. By 1977, Seiko had become the largest watch company in the world, pulling in $700 million in revenue from 18 million units produced. The Swiss industry went into free fall. Between 1970 and 1983, the number of Swiss watch companies plummeted from roughly 1,600 to about 600. Employment in the industry collapsed from around 90,000 workers to just 28,000. 60,000 skilled jobs vanished. Towns in the Jura Mountains that had been watchmaking communities for 300 years saw their factories go dark. The designation Swiss-made went from being a guarantee of quality to sounding overpriced and old-fashioned. Seiko boutiques were popping up in every city, while Swiss mechanical watches gathered dust on store shelves. An industry that had taken 4 centuries to build was being dismantled in under 15 years. But Switzerland did not die, and the reason it survived is one of the strangest rescue stories in business history. In 1982, the Swiss banks that had been propping up the 2 largest remaining watch conglomerates, ASUAG and SSIH, decided they had had enough. They wanted out. So they brought in a management consultant named Nicholas Hayek to do what everyone expected would be a straightforward job: plan the orderly bankruptcy of what was left of the Swiss watch industry. Shut it down with dignity. Hayek was a Lebanese-born businessman living in Zurich who had once pawned his own household furniture to fund his fledgling consulting firm back in 1963. By the 1980s, that firm was thriving, advising corporate giants like Siemens and Nestlé. The banks wanted Hayek to write a death certificate for Swiss watchmaking. He wrote a business plan instead. Hayek's proposal went against every instinct the industry had. He said ASWAG and SSIH should not be shut down. They should merge into one company. And that merged company should beat the Japanese at their own game by creating a cheap, colorful, fun, Swiss-made quartz watch that could sell for around $50. In 1983, the banks reluctantly agreed. The merger happened, creating what would eventually become the Swatch Group, and Hayek launched the Swatch. The name was short for second watch, which was exactly the point. It was not supposed to replace your nice watch. It was the playful plastic one you wore to the beach. The Swatch had just 51 components, instead of the 90+ found in a typical mechanical movement. It was assembled entirely by robots. It was sealed shut in a way that made repair impossible by design. It was the exact opposite of everything Swiss watchmaking had stood for over 4 centuries, and that was the genius of it. The Swatch generated massive sales volume, and that cash flow funded the survival of the prestigious brands sitting inside the same group. Brands like Omega, Longines, Breguet, and Blancpain. Meanwhile, the rest of the Swiss industry repositioned mechanical watches as luxury objects, collector's items, status symbols. Rolex stopped trying to out-accurate Seiko and started selling prestige, heritage, and the kind of wrist candy that got you noticed at a dinner party. The Quartz revolution killed the Swiss watch as a mass-market product forever, and the Swiss leaned into that reality instead of fighting it. So by the time Apple showed up, the Swiss watch industry had already survived one near-death experience and emerged stronger than before. The luxury repositioning had worked beyond anyone's projections. Through the 2000s and into the 2010s, Swiss watch brands rode a wave of global wealth that sent demand through the roof. China opened up as a market, and the appetite for Swiss luxury there was enormous. Waiting lists for Rolex models stretched into years. Auction prices for vintage Patek Philippe's broke records. The Swatch Group, the company Hayek had built from wreckage, owned 18 watch brands spanning every price segment. Annual Swiss watch export revenues climbed past $23 billion. The industry was thriving. The very idea that it might face another existential threat seemed absurd. The last thing anyone in Geneva or the Jura Valleys expected was that a company from Silicon Valley, one that had never made a watch in its life, was about to rewrite the rules all over again. The Apple Watch project started in early 2012, just a few months after Steve Jobs passed away in October 2011. Jony Ive, Apple's chief design officer, brought the idea to the table. He later told the watch magazine Hodinkee that he could not remember ever discussing watches with Jobs. Jobs had never shown any interest in the concept. This was Ive's vision entirely. He described the early process the way he described every Apple project: a small, tight-knit group of designers. An idea that started as a conversation, then changed the moment they started drawing and making physical objects. Things that were fragile as pure abstractions became galvanizing once there was a real object sitting on the table between them. Not everyone at Apple was on board. Several executives pushed back because they could not identify a clear use case for a screen on your wrist. What would the killer app be? Why would anyone need this? Tim Cook overruled the skeptics and approved the project in 2013. And then Apple hired the person who would actually build the thing. In March of 2013, Kevin Lynch left his job as Chief Technology Officer at Adobe and joined Apple as Vice President of Technology. Here is how secret the project was at that point. When Apple recruited Lynch, they did not tell him what he would be working on. He accepted the job without knowing what his role would be. When he showed up at Apple's campus, he skipped the normal new employee orientation program entirely. Instead, he went straight to a locked studio where a small team was already experimenting with early wristwatch prototypes. What Lynch found was a project still searching for its identity. The iPod team had built one concept using a click wheel. Other prototypes tried to shrink iPhone features down to a watch-sized screen. Lynch and his team quickly discovered a fundamental problem that nobody had fully thought through. They asked each other to hold up their arms as if they were checking a wristwatch, then timed how long they could comfortably keep them there. 30 seconds was painful. Any interaction on the watch needed to be fast, glanceable, and done within just a few seconds. That single constraint ended up shaping the entire product. Everything about the way the Apple Watch would work, from notification design to app architecture, grew out of the realization that you simply cannot hold your arm up and stare at your wrist the way you stare at a phone. Tim Cook formally announced the Apple Watch on September 9, 2014. It started shipping on April 24, 2015, and right from the launch, Apple made a play that seemed designed to challenge the Swiss luxury establishment directly. They released a model called the Apple Watch Edition, cased in 18-karat gold, priced at up to $17,000. Apple installed custom safes in its retail stores to hold the gold watches overnight. They opened pop-up boutiques in high-end shopping districts in Paris, London, and Tokyo. This was Ives' vision made real. He wanted the Apple Watch to be a fashion and luxury object first, and a piece of technology second. Apple even hired executives from the fashion world, from brands like Yves Saint Laurent, to help position the watch as a status accessory. That is exactly the moment when Jean-Claude Biver at Tag Heuer delivered his now famous prediction. The Apple Watch could not be repaired in 1,000 years, he told reporters. It could not be inherited by your children. It would never become a status symbol. And at $17,000 for a device whose processor would be outdated in 3 years, you could see his logic. The Swiss watch world looked at Apple the same way it had looked at Seiko in 1969, as an outsider who did not understand the rules of the game. But Apple had a problem of its own, one that even its executives had not fully anticipated. The Gold Edition was a spectacular commercial failure. Total sales reportedly numbered in the low tens of thousands, and the vast majority of those purchases happened in the first 2 weeks after launch. Once the initial buzz faded, almost nobody was buying a $17,000 Apple Watch. Across all models, Apple had reportedly forecast around 40 million units for the first year. They sold approximately 10 million. Some of the leftover gold editions were eventually fire-sold for as little as $700. By September of 2016, Apple quietly killed the gold models entirely and replaced them with a ceramic version priced at $1,299. The luxury gambit was over. Jony Ives' dream of the Apple Watch as a fashion icon had collided with a simple reality. Nobody was going to pay Rolex money for something that needed a software update, and that failure turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to the product. The original Apple Watch had a heart rate sensor built into its back. It was mostly there for fitness tracking, for closing the activity rings, for counting calories during runs and workouts. Apple had created a companion health app on the iPhone as a simple place to store the data streaming off the watch sensor. What nobody anticipated was what happened when millions of people started wearing a heart rate monitor on their wrists 24 hours a day. People began getting notifications that their resting heart rate was abnormally high, or abnormally low, or that the watch had detected an irregular rhythm, and those people went to their doctors. And in case after case, doctors discovered serious conditions, some of them life-threatening, that the patients had no idea they had. The letters started arriving at Apple's headquarters in Cupertino by the hundreds, then by the thousands. People writing to say the Apple Watch had flagged a cardiac arrhythmia that turned out to be atrial fibrillation. People saying the watch had detected a hard fall and automatically called emergency services when they could not reach their phone. Parents describing how a heart rate alert sent them to the emergency room just in time. Jony Ive told the Washington Post in 2018 that he had personally read thousands of these letters. He described using the watch himself during an emergency, and he said something that captured what the product had become. He said he was zealous about the watch because he saw it as making a material difference in people's quality of life and in their actual ability to be alive. Apple doubled down completely. With the Series 4 in 2018, they added the ability to take an electrocardiogram right from your wrist. Apple received clearance from the United States Food and Drug Administration for this feature, which they claimed was the first time such clearance had been granted for a mainstream consumer device. The digital crown on the side of the watch, the little knob you turn to scroll, had to be entirely redesigned with new materials so it could conduct an electrical signal and read the heart's electrical activity through the skin. They added fall detection that could tell if you had taken a hard impact and stopped moving. They added walking steadiness tracking that could predict whether you were at elevated risk of falling in the future. Each generation of the Apple Watch moved further from luxury accessory and closer to medical device that happened to show you the time and your text messages. Something else was happening that the sales numbers alone did not capture. People who bought an Apple Watch went through a predictable behavioral arc. They would tell themselves they would wear it sometimes, for workouts or travel, but stay loyal to their favorite traditional watch for everyday use. Within weeks, most of them had stopped putting on the traditional watch entirely. The notifications, the health data, the convenience of paying for things with a flick of the wrist, all of it created a daily dependency that a mechanical watch simply could not match. The Swiss industry had spent decades conditioning people to think of a watch as a fashion accessory, something you wore to express taste and status. Apple had turned the watch back into a tool, exactly what it had been before the Quartz crisis forced the Swiss to reinvent it as luxury. And tools win when they are useful. The sales numbers told the rest of the story. By 2019, Apple was shipping more than 30 million watches a year. The entire Swiss watch industry combined shipped about 21 million. A single product from a single company in California now outsold centuries of combined Swiss output by a wide margin. Swiss watch unit sales dropped from roughly 25 million per year in 2015, the year the Apple Watch first appeared, to around 13 million by 2025. In one decade, the volume of Swiss watches sold worldwide was nearly cut in half. But here is where the story bends, in a direction that simple disruption narratives do not usually cover. Because the Swiss watch industry did not lose money, it actually made more. Swiss watch export revenues climbed from about $23 billion in 2015 to a peak of roughly $29 billion by 2024. How do you cut your volume in half and still grow revenue? The same way you survived the Quartz crisis 40 years earlier. You go upmarket. The brands that thrived through the Apple Watch era were the ones selling watches at $5,000, $10,000, and $50,000 and above. Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet. These were not competing with Apple at all. They were competing with vacation homes and vintage cars for the wallets of wealthy collectors. The mid-range Swiss brands were the casualties. The companies selling watches between $500 and $2,000 were the ones that got crushed. Those buyers were the exact customers most likely to look at an Apple Watch and ask themselves a very simple question. Why would I pay $1,500 for something that only tells time when I can spend $400 on something that tracks my heart rhythm, sends my messages, plays my music, gives me directions, and also tells time? The pattern is almost eerie in how precisely it repeats. In the 1970s, Japanese Quartz attacked the Swiss from the bottom of the market. The Swiss survived by abandoning the bottom and retreating to luxury. In the 2010s, Apple attacked the mid-range. The Swiss survived by abandoning the mid-range and retreating even further into ultra-luxury. Each disruption made the Swiss watch industry smaller in volume and more exclusive in positioning. Each time, they lost the customer who bought a watch to use it and held on to the customer who bought a watch to own it. Jean-Claude Biver's prediction was factually accurate on every point. The Apple Watch cannot be repaired across generations. It cannot be meaningfully inherited. The $17,000 gold edition is now classified by Apple as technologically obsolete. You cannot even get it serviced. As a traditional timepiece, it fails every test the Swiss would apply. But Biver made the same miscalculation that the Swiss industry made when Seiko put the Astron in that Tokyo department store in 1969. He evaluated Apple's product using the Swiss industry's own criteria. He judged a computer by the standards of a clock, and while he was measuring permanence and prestige, Apple was measuring heart rhythms and saving lives. The Apple Watch did not beat the Swiss at watchmaking. It changed what the word watch means for an entire generation. To someone born after 2000, a watch is not a hand-assembled mechanical movement from the Jura Mountains. It is a sensor array on your wrist that monitors your health, handles your notifications, unlocks your front door, and pays for your groceries. The fact that it also displays the time is almost beside the point. The Swiss watch industry will survive. Revenue numbers make that clear. Wealthy collectors still line up for years to get a Patek Philippe Nautilus or a Rolex Daytona at retail price. But the number of people on Earth who consider a mechanical watch to be something they need shrinks a little bit every year. The Swiss keep going higher and more exclusive. The question that nobody can answer yet is how far upmarket you can climb before you run out of mountain. There is a deeper lesson buried in all of this, and it goes beyond watches. Every time a traditional industry faces technological disruption, the incumbents make the same mistake. They evaluate the new product using their own metrics. The Swiss judged quartz by the standards of mechanical watchmaking and decided it was cheap junk. They judged the Apple Watch by the standards of luxury horology and decided it was a disposable gadget. Both times, they were right about the product and wrong about the market. Because the customers were not comparing a Seiko to a Patek Philippe. They were comparing a watch that cost $50 and never lost a second to a watch that cost $5,000 and drifted every day. And a generation later, customers were not comparing an Apple Watch to a Rolex. They were comparing a device that could call an ambulance when they collapsed to a device that looked beautiful on their wrist while they lay on the floor. 400 years ago, a religious reformer in Geneva banned jewelry, and desperate goldsmiths reinvented themselves as watchmakers to survive. Today, the descendants of that tradition sell watches priced higher than houses to survive a different kind of threat. The craft endures, the customers change, and a company that started by making computers in a California garage now ships more timepieces than all of Switzerland combined. If you found this story interesting, hit subscribe and leave a comment telling us whether you think Swiss watches will still matter in 50 years or if the smartwatch has already won.